10 Chilling Crimes of the Real-Life Spy Who Inspired James Bond. Welcome to Creepshow, where we uncover stories that blur the lines between hero and villain. James Bond, the suave and daring spy, is an icon of espionage. But did you know the character was inspired by a real-life agent whose actions were just as thrilling and far darker? Tonight, we dive into the extraordinary life of Sidney Reilly, known as the Ace of Spies, as we reveal 10 chilling crimes of the real-life spy who inspired James Bond. From cold-blooded murder to ruthless betrayal, Reilly's life was one of intrigue, ambition, and moral ambiguity. Let's uncover the dark truths behind the man who became the blueprint for fiction's greatest spy. Number 10. Blood on the Train, the Paris Anarchist, Murder. Sidney Reilly's early years are cloaked in mystery. Much like the man himself, he was likely born Georgy Rosenblum in Odessa, Ukraine, around 1873, though much of his background remains unverified. His first documented appearance in history, however, was anything but ordinary. In 1895, a murder aboard a train in Paris marked his entrance onto the world stage. Railway staff opened the door to a private compartment to find a man, later identified as Constant Della Casa, lying in a pool of his own blood. He had been stabbed multiple times. Though critically injured, Della Casa managed to utter his attacker's descriptions before succumbing to his wounds the next day. French authorities discovered that Della Casa was a courier for an illegal anarchist organization, tasked with transporting large sums of money. His murder was no random act of violence. It was a calculated strike. The plot thickened when a Russian exile named Jan Wojtak confessed to organizing the attack. He revealed that he had worked with Reilly, who learned of Della Casa's role and saw an opportunity for a lucrative heist. After ambushing the courier and splitting the money, estimated at $75,000 in today's currency, Reilly fled to England, disappearing into the shadows. Number 9. Poisoning Hugh Thomas, the Widow's Fortune. In the late 19th century, the English countryside was a place of charm and tranquility for many. But for Hugh Thomas, a wealthy older man with a much younger wife, it became the backdrop for a chilling and calculated scheme. His tragic death in 1898 was declared a natural passing at the time, but the truth lurking beneath the surface is far darker. A tale of greed, deceit, and possibly murder. Hugh Thomas lived a comfortable life, having accumulated a considerable fortune. His wife, Margaret Thomas, was young, beautiful, and ambitious. Into their lives entered a charismatic and mysterious figure named Sidney Reilly, a man with a knack for inserting himself into the lives of others, often with sinister intent. Reilly quickly became close to Margaret, charming her with his enigmatic personality. Just weeks after their acquaintance, Hugh made a significant change to his will, naming Margaret as the sole heir to his fortune. 1 week later, Hugh was found dead in his hotel room under what seemed to be natural circumstances. A Dr. T.W. Andrew, who had also been staying at the hotel, conveniently appeared to certify the cause of death. He stated that Hugh had succumbed to influenza, a fainting of the heart. This vague explanation satisfied the authorities, and no further questions were asked. There was no autopsy, no investigation, and no inquest. Margaret insisted that her husband be buried quickly, but there was a problem with Dr. Andrews' story. No one by that name was registered as a medical professional anywhere in Britain. Witnesses who described the doctor noted something peculiar. His appearance bore a striking resemblance to Sidney Reilly. Hugh's untimely death left Margaret with a fortune. Free from her husband's shadow, she married Sidney Reilly just 5 months later, raising even more suspicion among those who knew the couple. Questions about Hugh's death lingered, but the lack of evidence meant the authorities had no reason to reopen the case. Was the charming Reilly behind the mysterious demise? Or had Margaret, with Reilly's help, orchestrated the perfect crime to claim her inheritance? Whatever the truth, Hugh Thomas's death became another chapter in Sidney Reilly's shadowy and sinister legacy, a man who saw no boundaries in his quest for wealth and power. Number 8. The Disappearance of Louisa Lewis. In 1908, a chilling footnote emerged in the life of Sidney Reilly, adding another layer of intrigue to the dark shadow he cast over history. Now a seasoned British spy, Reilly was staying at the Hotel Cecil during a trip to London. But his arrival at the hotel coincided with the mysterious disappearance of Louisa Lewis, a woman whose past connection to one of Reilly's most notorious schemes made her vanishing all the more sinister. Louisa Lewis was an unassuming hotel worker employed at the Hotel Cecil in 1908, but her story intersected with Sidney Reilly's much earlier. 10 years prior, she had worked at the hotel where Hugh Thomas, the wealthy man suspected to have been murdered by Reilly, had died. Louisa had been present when Thomas's body was discovered, and she had even encountered the enigmatic Dr. Andrew, the mysterious figure who certified Thomas's death, but who many believed was actually Reilly in disguise. It is unclear whether Louisa held any incriminating knowledge about Hugh Thomas's death, or if her memories of the doctor were coincidental, but her presence at both moments in Reilly's life raised suspicions that would haunt the legacy of the Ace of Spies. On October 25, 1908, Louisa was last seen alive on the grand staircase of the Hotel Cecil. Witnesses reported seeing her speaking with a man who matched Reilly's description, a man tall, well-dressed, and with a distinct air of authority. Shortly after that encounter, Louisa vanished without a trace. Her disappearance was as abrupt as it was baffling. No body was ever found. No evidence surfaced, and no one could determine what had happened to her. Some believed she had been silenced to protect secrets tied to Reilly's earlier schemes, particularly the death of Hugh Thomas. Others speculated that her vanishing was purely coincidental, though the timing and her history with Reilly seemed far too convenient to dismiss. Number 7. Counterfeiting Rubles. A Spy's Double Life. In 1899, the Russian government uncovered a sophisticated counterfeiting ring based in London. The gang was producing fake Russian rubles and smuggling them out of England, destabilizing Russia's already fragile economy. Among those suspected was Sidney Reilly, a shadowy figure who had already begun weaving a web of deception and intrigue. The counterfeit ruble operation was traced back to a company named Polysulfan, which was believed to be a front for smuggling the fake currency. Russian authorities, alarmed by the scale of the operation, sent a prosecutor to London to investigate. They also wrote to William Melville, the head of Scotland Yard's special branch, asking for help. But what the Russians didn't know was that Reilly was already entangled in British intelligence. He had been recruited as a spy by Melville himself, tasked with monitoring radical Russian exiles living in the UK. His position gave him access to sensitive information and the protection of one of Britain's most powerful law enforcement agencies. Reilly's relationship with Melville extended beyond espionage. Melville had even helped Reilly fabricate a new identity, securing him a British passport under the name Sidney Reilly. The name wasn't plucked from thin air. It belonged to a relative of Melville's wife who had died as an infant 2 decades earlier. With this new identity, Reilly became a British subject, effectively erasing his past and giving him a fresh start in the world of international intrigue. When the Russian prosecutor arrived in London to investigate the counterfeiting ring, Reilly was dangerously close to being implicated. However, it's likely that Melville tipped him off to the Russians' suspicions. With his cover blown, Reilly acted quickly. Before the investigation could tighten around him, he vanished, fleeing the UK and leaving behind more questions than answers. Number 6. Double-crossing. The Triple Agent's Game. Over the course of 2 decades, Sidney Reilly earned his reputation as one of Britain's most effective and enigmatic international spies. His name became synonymous with daring operations, but his movements and true intentions were shrouded in mystery. From the oil fields of Baku to the imperial palaces of St. Petersburg, from Manchuria during the Russo-Japanese War to New York City in the early years of World War I, Reilly seemed to be everywhere at once, slipping between nations and allegiances like a ghost. Reilly was always a man of ambition, but his true allegiance was to himself. He had no qualms about playing both sides, or all sides, if it served his interests. In Manchuria, as tensions between Russia and Japan escalated toward the Russo-Japanese War, Reilly operated as a triple agent, allegedly working for Britain, Japan, and Russia simultaneously. His loyalties, if they existed at all, were fluid. Reilly's ability to navigate the chaos of war wasn't just about espionage, it was about profit. He anticipated the outbreak of war in Manchuria and used the opportunity to enrich himself. Reilly bought up vast quantities of medical supplies, knowing that demand would skyrocket. When the war began, he sold the supplies to the Russian military at a significant profit. To him, the lines between spy, businessman, and opportunist were always blurred. While Reilly's exploits made him an asset to British intelligence, his superiors were well aware of his duplicitous nature. A British intelligence officer once described Reilly as a man without patriotism or principles, and therefore not recommended for any position which requires loyalty, as he would not hesitate to use it to further his own commercial interests. This damning assessment captured the essence of a man who viewed loyalty as a tool to be discarded when it no longer served him. Reilly's double-crossing behavior cemented his reputation as a master manipulator, but it also made him dangerous to everyone he worked with. To Reilly, alliances were temporary, principles were negotiable, and the game was always about winning, on his own terms. Number 5. The Krupp Strangling. Murder in the Shadows. In 1909, Sidney Reilly undertook one of his most daring missions yet, infiltrating the Krupp weapons factory in Essen, Germany. Krupp was a colossal industrial powerhouse, the backbone of Germany's military manufacturing. For Britain, obtaining intelligence about its operations was critical. Reilly, with his unmatched skill in deception, was the perfect man for the job. Reilly's plan was as bold as it was dangerous. He posed as a welder and secured a job at the Krupp plant, blending seamlessly into the workforce. But Reilly didn't stop there. To gain greater access, he joined the Volunteer Fire Brigade, a move that allowed him to study detailed maps of the facility. With this insider knowledge, he set his sights on the plant's drawing office, where blueprints of Germany's most advanced weapons were stored. Under the cover of night during a shift, Reilly made his move. He slipped away from his station, careful to avoid suspicion, and crept into the drawing office. Inside, he began photographing blueprints, an invaluable cache of intelligence for British military planners. But Reilly's covert operation didn't go unnoticed. A foreman patrolling the factory spotted him entering the office. Suspicious, the man followed and confronted Reilly, demanding an explanation. The confrontation quickly escalated. Knowing that discovery would mean certain capture or execution, Reilly made a ruthless decision. In the dimly lit office, he strangled the foreman before the alarm could be raised. The brutal act was swift and silent, a chilling reminder of the lengths Reilly was willing to go to complete his mission. With the foreman dead, Reilly knew time was running out. He hid the body, gathered the photographs, and made his escape. Fleeing the factory, he sought refuge at a safe house in Dortmund, evading immediate capture. The murder triggered a massive manhunt. German authorities scoured the region for the elusive spy, but Reilly's ability to disappear was unparalleled. He changed his identity, slipping through the cracks of the investigation. Before long, he boarded a ship bound for England, vanishing into the fog of international espionage. Number 4. Bigamy. A spy's tangled love life. Sidney Reilly, like Ian Fleming's fictional James Bond, had a weakness for women, a charm so potent it often became one of his most effective weapons. But Reilly's entanglements with the opposite sex weren't just romantic or strategic. They also landed him on the wrong side of the law. Bigamy wasn't a one-time mistake for Reilly. It was a recurring feature of his chaotic personal life. Reilly's first known wife was Margaret Thomas, the widow of the wealthy Hugh Thomas, who had died under suspicious circumstances in 1898. Their marriage appeared to be a calculated move on Reilly's part. By marrying Margaret, he secured access to the fortune she had inherited, solidifying his financial footing as he built his career in espionage. But Reilly's devotion to Margaret was fleeting at best. By 1910, Reilly was in Russia, looking to expand his influence and gather intelligence for Britain. He needed connections, particularly to high-ranking officials in the Russian Naval Ministry. Enter Nadia Zaleski, the wife of the chief aide to the Navy minister. Reilly's seduction of Nadia wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. Their affair gave him proximity to the Naval Ministry and access to valuable information. Reilly's audacity didn't stop there. He convinced Nadia's husband to divorce her by paying him off. In 1914, Reilly married Nadia, despite the inconvenient fact that he was still legally married to Margaret. Years passed, and Reilly's life remained a whirlwind of espionage, intrigue, and deception. By 1922, he found himself entangled with yet another woman, Pepita Bobadilla, a young actress who captivated him with her beauty and vivacity. This time, Reilly took the rare step of divorcing Nadia before marrying Pepita. But Margaret? She remained legally his wife throughout all of this. Her connection to Reilly a loose end he never bothered to tie up. Number 3. Interfering with a British election, the Zinoviev letter scandal. By the 1920s, Sidney Reilly was no stranger to political manipulation. His skills as a master of espionage and intrigue made him a dangerous player in the shadowy world of intelligence, and in 1924, he became embroiled in one of Britain's most controversial political scandals, the Zinoviev letter affair. The controversy unfolded during the tenure of Ramsay MacDonald, Britain's first Labour Party Prime Minister. MacDonald's government was a seismic shift in British politics, marking the rise of a party with socialist roots. MacDonald further angered Britain's intelligence community by formally recognizing the Soviet Union, a move that was seen as dangerously sympathetic to communism. In October 1924, MacDonald's position weakened when he intervened to stop the prosecution of a communist newspaper editor, sparking outrage. Facing mounting political pressure, MacDonald called for new elections. But just days before the vote, British newspapers published a bombshell, a letter supposedly written by Soviet official Grigory Zinoviev. The letter urged British communists to work with Labour to spark a proletarian revolution, implying that a Labour government was colluding with the Soviet Union to overthrow Britain's democratic system. The timing of the leak was devastating for MacDonald and his party, and it contributed to their defeat in the election. In the years that followed, the Zinoviev letter was exposed as a forgery, and historians began to uncover the involvement of rogue intelligence agents in its creation and dissemination. Among those implicated was Sidney Reilly. Espionage historian Christopher Andrew wrote that Reilly was one of the operatives responsible for publicizing the letter. In fact, a copy of the forged letter was later found written in what appears to be Reilly's handwriting. His motivations were clear. Reilly despised socialism and was deeply opposed to the Labour Party's policies, particularly its recognition of the Soviet Union. Number 2. Plotting a Soviet coup, the Latvian rifleman scheme. In 1918, as the Bolsheviks tightened their grip on power in post-revolutionary Russia, Sidney Reilly embarked on one of his most audacious missions. Sent by MI6, Reilly arrived in Moscow with a singular purpose: to overthrow the fledgling Soviet government. Working alongside fellow MI6 operative Robert Bruce Lockhart, Reilly devised a plot so daring it bordered on the fantastical. Reilly's plan centered on a critical vulnerability in the Bolshevik regime. The Latvian riflemen, an elite unit stationed in Moscow and referred to as the Praetorian Guard of the Revolution. The Latvian soldiers had been instrumental in protecting the Bolshevik leadership, including Lenin and Trotsky during the chaotic early days of their rule. But by 1918, the Latvians were growing increasingly disillusioned with Bolshevik policies, particularly the broken promises of better conditions and pay. Sensing an opportunity, Reilly approached the Latvian officers, exploiting their dissatisfaction. He proposed a bold plan. The riflemen would seize Lenin, Trotsky, and other top Soviet leaders at gunpoint, staging a coup that would topple the Bolshevik regime. Reilly assured his superiors that the coup would be relatively bloodless. He claimed that Lenin and Trotsky wouldn't be executed, but instead paraded through the streets in their underwear to humiliate them and symbolically dismantle their authority. This, however, was likely a deception. The Bolsheviks later insisted that the true plan involved mass executions of Soviet leaders and widespread violence. The scheme was precarious from the start. Espionage in Moscow during the height of revolutionary fervor was fraught with danger, and the Soviets were already on high alert for counter-revolutionary activity. Before the plan could be fully set in motion, the Cheka, the Soviet secret police, caught wind of the plot. The Soviets launched a sweeping crackdown, arresting numerous Western diplomats, including Reilly's co-conspirator Robert Bruce Lockhart. The coup attempt unraveled before it could even begin, and Moscow descended into a paranoid frenzy as the Cheka rooted out anyone suspected of being involved. Reilly, true to his reputation as the ultimate escape artist, managed to evade capture. Disguising himself, he slipped through Bolshevik checkpoints and made a harrowing journey to safety, fleeing Russia via Finland and eventually reaching Sweden. Number 1. Offering to turn traitor, the betrayal that sealed his fate. By 1925, Sidney Reilly, the so-called Ace of Spies, had pushed his luck too far. After years of daring espionage and ruthless betrayals, his enemies finally caught up with him. His downfall began when he agreed to meet with a supposed anti-communist organization known as the Trust. The Trust presented itself as an underground network dedicated to overthrowing the Soviet government. Exactly the kind of group Reilly would align with. But unbeknownst to him, the Trust was a Soviet counterintelligence operation, a front created by the Cheka to lure and trap enemies of the Bolshevik regime. Confident in his own abilities, Reilly crossed into Soviet territory to meet the Trust's leadership. Almost immediately, he was arrested by the Cheka and taken to the infamous Lubyanka prison in Moscow, a place synonymous with fear and brutality. Reilly's capture was a coup for the Soviets. Here was a man who had plotted coups, assassinations, and intelligence operations against them for years. His interrogators, however, refrained from physically torturing him, relying instead on psychological pressure and manipulation. Reilly, always the pragmatist, soon appeared willing to switch sides to save his own skin. He wrote directly to Cheka head Felix Dzerzhinsky, offering to reveal critical intelligence on British and American spy networks. It seemed Reilly was ready to betray everyone he had worked with, true to his reputation as a man without loyalty or principle. But Dzerzhinsky didn't take the bait. Whether he doubted Reilly's sincerity or simply didn't need the information, he ordered Reilly's execution instead. In November 1925, Sidney Reilly was taken to a forest outside Moscow. There, the Ace of Spies met his end, executed by Soviet agents. His death marked the final chapter of a life defined by betrayal, ambition, and intrigue. After Reilly's execution, a small diary was discovered, hidden in a crack in his cell wall. Written on cigarette papers, it detailed Soviet interrogation techniques, likely a desperate effort by Reilly to document his experiences and sell the information if he ever escaped. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadowy life of Sidney Reilly, the man who inspired one of fiction's greatest spies. His real-life exploits paint a picture far darker than James Bond's escapades, filled with betrayal, deception, and a dangerous lack of loyalty to anyone but himself. If you enjoyed this dive into history's most enigmatic figures, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Creepshow. Let us know which story shocked you the most, or suggest other historical figures you'd like us to explore. Until next time, remember, the truth can often be stranger and darker than fiction. Stay curious, stay safe, and see you in the next one.